Bombay, and as I warned you, I wanted to just talk about documentary in India in connection with your own work. And I guess there are three general categories. First of all, your own documentaries. I think you've made almost 30.
More, yeah.
More
over
than
the
30
years, yeah.
over the years,
Yeah.
which is probably more than any other feature director, a director who's primarily known for features. You've made dozens. And also, I think there's a very important documentary sensibility in your feature films as well. And perhaps we could also talk generally about the situation of documentary in India, which I think is very problematical at the present moment, just judging from the debates that there were in Trivandrum about this. So, where should we start?
Well, where do you want to start? I mean, would you like to start where the problems are, or you know the history of Indian documentary film? One doesn't have to go through that whole thing. Well, if you know the history of Indian documentary film movement, then you'll automatically know where to locate the problems. Actually, it doesn't. One of the main problems for documentaries is outlets. And what are the outlets? The outlets for documentaries, whether it is in India or anywhere else, as long as there's no television, cinema was hardly the real outlet, because most commercial cinemas would not take documentaries to show. In India, we had one advantage, though, as you know. The films division used to have an arrangement with every single commercial cinema in the country. 20 minutes of showtime of every show was allowed for films division to show their films. So we developed this form of making documentaries, in quotes, of 10 to 20 minutes. So that became the first constraint. If you made a film that was longer than 20 minutes, you couldn't show it anywhere. So that also brings in other things, because it sets the parameters within which you can work. So your documentary films can't be longer than 10, 15 or 18 minutes, maybe maximum of 20 minutes. Then beyond that, what can you deal with in 10, 15, 18 and 20 minutes? Not all the subjects that you would like, or those that you would like to deal with, which require much more detailed treatment, you're likely to deal with them in a very impressionistic way. So that's one of the limitations. So we started to develop what one might call an impressionistic documentary movement, not a proper documentary situation in which you could make a film of maybe 1 minute if you wanted, or make a film of 10 hours. But with television coming in, which gives you yet another outlet by which you can show documentary films, perhaps we may have come to an era where there will be some kind of flowering of the documentary.
I was wondering, let's hope. It is an opportunity.
Yes, opportunity, because they have given, in India, one of the advantages now, although again you see, you have this problem of our slots. The half-an-hour slot, which seems to be the kind of slot that television is working with, means that you make anything for about 22 and a half minutes. If you have to make it longer, then you make it for 45 minutes, so it can be shown over 2 half-an-hour slots. So, but it's possible you can make long things. You can make things going over 6 or 7 hours now. The other advantages being that it's also become more cost-effective to produce documentaries for television, because there's more advertising time being given to sponsors to encourage documentary filmmaking. So perhaps it will turn the corner,
Well, judging from the experience of other countries in television, I don't know how optimistic.
No, but I don't think other countries have thought in these terms.
No.
I don't know whether Canada allows, say, if you have sponsored programs, sponsored documentaries. As we know, documentary is not something that everybody is just dying to see. unless the subject matter is of general and enormous concern, public concern. If the subject matter is not of such high public concern, obviously you expect people seeing the documentary to be much smaller in numbers,
I think the Europeans have been more successful than we have. I think we also, since we also...
No, but then documentaries are it's a question of, say for instance, who is your audience for documentaries? I would say that specialized documentaries have specialized audiences.
Right.
Now, obviously, those people are not necessarily, you're not expecting to show the documentary in a cinema hall, or you're not likely to show it on television. You're probably showing it by other means, different means, and so on. But in India, such specialized documentaries are not, well, they are made, but the best of professionals don't go into making those, because there's not any money there's no money in it, You can't really make a good livelihood or a reasonable livelihood by making highly specialized documentaries. Say if you were to make anthropological films, or you were to make films about science, which are very, very specific. Or
most of those are imported, aren't they?
At the moment, yes, many of them are, because these things cost money. Where will you need money to make films like that? There are certain kinds of films. Say even wildlife films on wildlife or ecology. These are not things that you can just go and shoot over a weekend and come back, or shoot for 5 days or 10 days or 15 days. Some of these films you require people to be shooting maybe for 2, 3, 4, 5 years before they turn out a film. Now, if you have to do that, you need to be supported and subsidized. You can't possibly make it as a commercial venture, or expect any commercial interest to take it up as a project. These are some of our real problems.
Part of the problem also is that there's not a viable 16mm distribution circuit.
Well, 16mm distribution circuit in India came to naught, I think, largely because it was developing. Came to naught because of the arrival of television and video. But again, these things can come on television or video. There's no reason why it shouldn't. We have, as you probably know already, we have what is known as a field publicity unit. Government of India has something called a field publicity unit, which has 16mm cameras and equipment that is taken to practically every district, town and villages in districts. Say we have over 560 districts in this country. Now these field publicity vans are supposed to go from time to time to various village clusters and show them films of a kind that informs them about things that are happening in the country, of a kind that tells them things that they ought to know or learn from. They are general information documentaries, some of them dealing with agriculture, rural health, health and all sorts of things like that. Now, it hasn't worked very successfully. It did work quite effectively in the first 5 to 10 years when this whole business started, which was in the 50s. But after that, it generally seems to have lapsed.
This is what I've heard.
Yeah. Now, from my recent meetings with people in the Information Broadcasting Ministry, it appears that they are going to revive this. Because they feel that television, although we see it as a nationwide medium, what actually is happening with television is that it is becoming more and more, or rather because of the economics of buying sets and so on, and also the fact that if you have sets that the government itself might give to village organizations or schools or panchayats and so on, you may either have a problem of power, in which case if you have no If the electricity fails, then the message doesn't come across because your machine is dead. Or if you don't have people to look after the equipment or to replace parts and so on, it again goes dead. So this is a major problem with television. So because of this, what's happening is that most of our sets are located either in high urban, middle urban, or semi-urban areas. So yet again you have this problem of not having a reach over the entire rural part of India, which in any case is a major part of India by way of numbers. But difficult to get everybody under the umbrella because it's a dispersed population as against an urban population, which is, it's all sort of centripetally organized, while the rural population, more centrifugally organized, is much more dispersed. And for that sort of thing, your field publicity units are much more useful than perhaps even television. Now this is something that is being recognized slowly. I mean, when I say recent, I mean last week, when I had a chat with some people, and they said that they are looking at the field publicity units all over again to activate them.
Using video?
Yes, well, not necessarily video, with projectors, 16mm projectors, you see. Because video equipment is fine, but it's also a little delicate.
Yes.
If you're going on bumpy roads with equipment of this kind, or there's so much dust, it can just snarl the equipment, while less sophisticated equipment, such as 16mm projectors, these are very hardy, and they can run on little generators. And today you have generators that people can carry in one hand and a projector in another, you see, and show them wherever you want, any part of the country. So you have this advantage.
Some of the filmmakers I've spoken to talk about political problems with these field publicity units, about how they can't touch controversial subjects, or they can't touch subjects from an oppositional point of view, or running into problems with local bosses.
Well, it also depends on, it's a very difficult question. It depends on where you are, how you're looking at the world and from which point of view. I personally think that it's not such a big hassle. I mean, surely if I make a film about a political problem which matters to a certain number of people and to a certain kind of an audience, it will leave another audience completely cold. So it's a question of how do you schematize. See, you have a certain view, you have a certain ideology, a certain idea, you have a certain social objective. The social objective might be education, information of a learning kind, getting people to orient themselves differently from, let's say, traditional orientation, which is probably now, at this time, not helping them too much, which is really going against what, it's not really helping in any way at all, so they must change that orientation. Now, you may have subjects for films of this kind. Some of them, you see, like any audience group, is really concerned about itself. It's not really concerned about what happens in the rest of the world. Yes. Primarily, that's a concern. In a low information area, this is even more acutely felt. That is, your immediate needs are much more magnified than needs that are secondary or tertiary. So if one is worried about, say, political, when we say political, what kind of politics are we talking about? Are we talking about national politics? Are we talking about local politics? Are we talking about regional politics? What are we talking about? So it's a question of saying that if somebody is saying that political films can't get on field publicity unit, probably that's not the forum for it anyway. Now, if you're going to be talking about students' problems or what the government is doing and messing around with education and so on, and you make a film about that. That's a film you would like to be seen by people who can make a change. And the people who can make a change are those people whose political opinions matter. And also, on the other hand, it would for people who are concerned, which means students. So you have to get to this is your audience. So when we're talking about field publicity units, we are talking about yet again something else. Now I would say that if field publicity units, if we're talking about panchayat and local village politics and talking about representation or participation in and harnessing energies of the people into activities that would eventually help them. And if it's a question of education, education about democracy or education about how you should vote and education about what you should expect what you should do. Now, these things would be very useful for field publicity units. And those people who are voicing their protests are probably not even concerned about these matters.
Probably.
Yeah.
I'm just going to... Okay, why don't we maybe talk specifics now?
Yeah, sure.
You were kind enough to show me yesterday Nehru, which I believe is one of your more recent films, so why don't we talk about that?
Sure.
It's really an epic, isn't it? It was shown in installments of 1 hour each?
Yes,
on
three parts, yeah.
3 successive evenings, was it?
3 successive evenings on television.
I see. One of the things that was in the back of my mind as I was watching it was the terms of your co-production with the Soviets.
Yeah.
I thought it must have been a very delicate orchestration, was it?
Oh, it was a delicate orchestration because Nehru is our leader. And therefore we had to have our view or our perception of Nehru projected more than anybody else's projection, any other perception. So this, of course, was sorted out during the negotiations since I wrote the script. And it was essential, and I had said that I wouldn't make the film if I wasn't going to do the script. I would have to do the script. So I did the script, and we had a lot of hard discussions on the script, which took about a year for the negotiations to come through.
What kind of discussions? About content? Or?
On content, it was really about attitudes and views and worldview and a whole lot of other things. But this was important, because it always happens. Like, for instance, if I were to decide to make a film about a Canadian leader, for instance, and it is a co-production with the Canadians, then I would expect, and it would be natural for you as a Canadian to say that your perception of him should be the one that is more, it should be worked towards that perception rather than my perception. Naturally,
Naturally.
So that was what it was, and it worked out that way. But in order to achieve that, you have to go through a whole lot of situations, because you see, you come against other perceptions, and you have to then clarify those.
Can you give me an example?
Oh, many. Like, for instance, attitude towards, like, there was the Nehru's view of the Soviet Union, for instance, was one at the time of the revolution, which he had a view of the Soviet Union, and then how it developed and how it became influenced him a great deal at certain stages in his life, particularly through the 20s and 30s. And then after that, there was a phase when slowly, it was possible to get, India to win freedom, and when India did become free, then his view of the Soviet Union also imperceptibly started to change. Naturally, because it's no longer a view It is now a view of one autonomy dealing with another autonomy. You know, in terms of ideas and views, unrelated to power, you can accept the autonomy of an ideology. But when you yourself are politically an autonomy, then you're bound to expect a certain change of view. You know, and that change of view is important because it did happen over a period of time. Like, for instance, in 1928, when he wrote the book Soviet Russia, which was very, I mean, he had his views on, I mean, he was a lifelong socialist, there was no question about it, but the fact is that his Marxian or Leninist points of view that he would sometimes be very attracted to became a little less until in the 50s with the Avadi Congress, which took place in 1956. He developed a universal view that was certainly at variance from all this.
I thought that was done very subtly, the changes after independence.
Yes.
More in terms of non-alignment than in terms of a specific attitude.
Right, because you see that was bound to, but then I was more concerned since we had adopted a first person biography concept. I can't use the word autobiography, although every single word spoken in the film is Nehru's words. Nobody else, we have not quoted anybody else. It's only Nehru from the beginning to the end, including his will and testament. So, since we adopted this style, it was very important for me to get into his skin. You know, to start to see the world from the point of view that he was seeing, and how he was being affected by that world.
The very adoption of this first-person point of view, I thought, was also very strategic.
It was necessary because, you see, for two reasons. Yes, it is strategic insofar as if you have a view outside of him, you can have many views outside of him, not one. And you can have all kinds of reasonable and unreasonable views, meaningful and absurd views, popular and unpopular views, for views and against views. So to avoid that, because you see that you can do when you are thinking in terms of providing your evaluation. And we are too soon, we are too close to be able to do a proper historical evaluation of Nehru.
Well, especially with his dynasty still.
Well, not, I wouldn't put it that way. I would say that it's too soon, particularly in the context of India. You see, because after all, not only was Nehru, along with several other people of his generation, not only the founding father, but the dynamics of Indian growth, you know, free India's growth, the people who generated these dynamics, you know, who gave it its momentum and the directions that we have now chosen, whether we are stumbling and falling or whether we are losing control over it or shaping it, giving it a different shape. But the directions for all these things were set by people like him and his colleagues. So we are still under the influence of Nehru. You cannot imagine that we are not. We are.
So you accepted this constraint.
So you have to, no, you have to, it's historically important to do so. It would be ridiculous because your own reaction then becomes, no, I don't see the validity of it. At least not, you know, because history is a subject that I'm very interested in and concerned with. But I would also like to have a degree of validity where I'm not, you know, make these quick journalistic views because it would become journalistic view, you know, and I wanted to avoid a journalistic view.
It would probably also be too glorific if...
Yes, on one side there would be pressure to make it glorific.
This is what I was afraid of in the first 2 minutes when I heard Indira.
Yeah.
I was afraid that you were going to follow the Western formula of the sort of interview biography. And
I wasn't going to do that, because then you have to sit down and say, 4 people have said good things about him, let me get 4 other people who will say bad things about him. That would be ridiculous, because it's neither here nor there. But Nehru is a very fortunate subject for us to do a film on, simply because he has written so much. You know, the great advantage, because apart from writing his own autobiography, he wrote enormous quantities to different people at different times about different subjects, because he didn't keep too much to himself. You know, he didn't sort of, if something worried him, it was very important for him to write, because he could find his focus by writing, you know. He could clarify his own attitudes and views by writing about them. And he wrote them in the form of letters, he wrote them in the form of books, he wrote them in the form of letters to chief ministers, you know, when he was Prime Minister of India, on all manner of subjects. He often spoke, his public speeches were like that too. He often used to make public speeches when he would sit down, stand up and talk to, let's say, 500,000 farmers about agriculture and what he thought about it and whether it was right, and he would constantly want his audience also to function to some extent as his bouncing board, you know, to test out his ideas, to clarify some of the ideas that may have remained fuzzy in his mind. You know, so because he wrote so much, and much of what he said was also recorded, he was a wonderful subject for a film.
Yes, for sure.
I mean, this was very important, because there could have been other, I mean, if he hadn't written at all, then it would have been difficult to make a film of this kind.
For sure.
Yeah.
As it was, I thought that the more personal documents gradually disappeared after independence.
Which is true.
The more intimate ones.
Yeah. And it became less and less possible for him.
Yes.
As a human being too. It became less and less possible for him. And that comes through too.
Yes.
As a human, as he grows up, and it slowly starts to, and then he starts to, he seems to, I mean, he appears to, I mean, the pressures of life and his position as Prime Minister is such that his private life seems to become less and less and less, which is true, which is what happened to him.
Those later, there was one interview, and then there was like a cinema verite council session.
Yes,
of some
yes,
kind.
it was.
Were they films division?
No.
They
that
were foreign
was
newsreels? Or?
Yeah, that was made shot by, you know, the Drew. I don't know whether you Drew,
I saw
wife
them
and
on
husband.
the credits.
Yeah, so I got the material from them. You see, they had shot this during the time they were here. They were doing a film called A Week in the Life of Prime Minister Nehru.
Yes, I've often seen the title, but I've never seen the film.
Yeah, so when they were doing that, it was also the time with India. We were, you know, when this business of China claiming territory, and which eventually led to a war between China and ourselves. And the very interesting thing, how Nehru in fact allowed them into a meeting where he was discussing what not only the diplomatic strategies and also the problems, because by that time the Chinese had already crossed the frontiers, and it's a fantastic meeting. I mean, I can't believe any nation's leader would allow any, and in this case foreigners, to come into a meeting like this. But Nehru was like that, you know. He was a very fascinating man, and he allowed them to film this. You know,
it was very interesting, particularly because Indians at that point were not filming anything like that. They weren't really interested in documenting intimate moments or doing any kind of cinema verite.
In fact, at that time, I think Drews and this chap who was their cameraman, who's from MIT, what's his name?
Leacock.
Leacock was the cameraman here for this particular film.
See.
And people like this, they were the first verite people. We had not yet, in India for documentaries, even synchronized sound shooting was not being done at that time. You know, in the early 60s.
Even now it's quite rare, isn't it?
It is rare. Well, it's not all that rare now, but it used to be quite rare until the middle 60s, certainly. Late 60s, I mean, I was one of the few people who was doing this from the very beginning.
Yes, well, I noticed that when I saw Simhasta.
Yeah. So you see, and not with a silent camera. We used to, wrap up our RE2Cs with all kinds of material, artificial blimps. I mean, things like cushions and pillows and so on to cut the sound. Because it was mainly because we didn't have equipment of this kind.
It was also, I think, because you were all locked into 35mm. And
well, even now, there's not very much 16mm work being done in India. Because in India, film means cinema film. Film means films to be shown in commercial cinemas. It hasn't got very much beyond that. It never did. Because that's where it was at. If you were thinking in terms of making a career, if you were thinking in terms of making a success of anything, you would have to be in the cinema. And when you had to be in the cinema, it meant fiction films. Films that you could show in commercial cinema houses. Otherwise, whatever you did was some strange thing. You made a news reel. That's how it used to be defined, actually.
Yes.
For a very long time. So that's why we never had. I mean, it was never considered a very attractive side of the business. You know.
Coming back to Nehru just for a minute, the other problem I thought that you must have really faced was the absence of documents, of archival visual materials, especially from the early period.
Well, from the early period, there was very little. Now I'm told that they have discovered a little bit of film. Someone was telling me that there is a little bit of film which Motilal Nehru, one of his friends, that is Jawaharlal Nehru's father's friend, had taken some home movies with Nehru and the other children and so on, and the family, which has been found in somebody's house. So that is now in possession of Rajiv Gandhi, I'm told, and they are looking for ways to restore it. I couldn't get any at that time. Nothing was available. Of course, we did a lot of research. I mean, I got material like the 1899 and material from 1901 from archives all over the world because it wasn't available. We didn't have, but then it helped improve our archival collection, making this film.
For sure.
Yes, it did. We managed to get a lot of material. I got the first known shot of Jawaharlal Nehru going to jail for the first time, which I found in an old Pathe newsreel in London, in the Pathe archives. It was just a 4-second piece. We stretched it to make it about 8 seconds. He's standing behind bars, 1921, first time when he was put in jail, and his father on the other side. Yeah. Now, nobody knew such a thing had existed. I had seen photographs of this because the Nehru Memorial Fund, their archives have a still of that. A photographer had taken a picture, but it wasn't believed that this existed, that anybody had filmed this. Because in 1921 in India, it would have been a very old hand-cranked camera, and I have a feeling that it was shot on either 16 millimeter or 9.5, that French gauge with the sprocket in the middle. So I managed to get that. I managed to get a lot of such material, which simply wasn't available in Bombay or in India.
So there was some real detective work.
Oh, a lot of detective work to get all this material. Now even the Drew film, everybody, and somebody remembered it in Allahabad when I was researching for it, said yes, there was this American couple that had come to shoot, and that was probably the last time anybody did a film on Nehru. And so I found out who it was, and then got in touch with Time Life people. And then they put me on to someone else, and they put me on to the Drews. And then the Drews sent me a cassette eventually and said, if you mark out what you want, then we can send you the duplicate negative, which we did. It took us a long time. I mean, it took us about 3 years of very, very intense work to get all the material we needed.
You seem to get really involved in this kind of research material.
Yes.
I think with the Satyajit Ray film, it also was a great effort, and a lot of energy and time were involved in the research.
Because you see, you become immediately conscious of one very important fact when you're doing documentaries of this kind, that whether you like it or not, you would have created source material for anybody else who's going to do things after you. And if it is going to become source material, then you might as well do a good job of it, a reasonably good job of it, so that they don't have to look. Because I've always suffered from this problem that whenever I've had to make a film on anything, all the research has had to be done. All the primary research has had to be done apart from everything else. And I feel that it's very unfair to filmmakers that they should be involved in so much researching. And so I hope that with at least some of the films I have made, that people who wish to make films on that subject, they don't have to go through so much of researching,
Well, in 20 years when the next film on Nehru is made, it's true.
Yeah. Because we have just about every single inch of film on Nehru now, except for this new material that has suddenly emerged from his childhood, which nobody really knows because it hasn't been seen yet. So when they see it, it will be very interesting. Because sometimes you come upon very interesting material without realizing how and where. A lot of it gets lost also in the process, which is what makes my heart bleed when I know that so much material, particularly on the freedom movement, on the Congress party, there was a wonderful man called Motwani, and from the year 1921, 1925, he followed every single political leader, mainly Gandhi and his close associates, and every single Congress party meeting. He covered that on film, everything. But when he died, all this material was lying in his house. Cans of film like this under beds and storage corners and stuff like that. And then the family, I think, separated. The children went and made their own homes and so on. So a lot of this was left, and some of them didn't know the value of all this, so sold it to make bangles.
Oh.
Yes. A lot of it gone forever. Now, this does happen, of course. We know that history is, what remains of history is really an accident.
I wonder if there's any systematic effort now to record the oral history of the people from the independent struggle who are still alive.
Not very much is being done. Now, there was another very interesting thing that had happened when I was making this film. It suddenly occurred to me, I came to know that from 1958 to 1963, Nehru died in 1964. From 1958 to 1963, there was a member of parliament from Rajasthan who decided that he would do a book called Nehru in his own words. So he got himself a tape recorder, and he told Nehru that he wanted 40 hours from him. But he said, over the next 5 years, whenever you have the time, give me half an hour, 45 minutes, whenever you feel like it, and then you just talk to me. And Nehru said, no, well, I've already done my autobiography, what is there for me to do, and so on. So, but he insisted. He said, no, that was a view earlier. I want your view of your own life now, after you've been in power as Prime Minister and everything. So he agreed. So he got him for 19 hours. Nehru could spare him 19 hours until he died. And those 19 hours, then he did a book in Hindi called, that again is called, Nehru in his own words. Now this member of parliament took all these tapes and gave it to All India Radio. Or so he claimed. We don't even know whether this actually happened. But he claimed to have given them to All India Radio. And I said, my God, if I get that, I won't even use a commentator's voice for my film. I will use Nehru's own voice. And I got, then went looking for it in All India Radio, couldn't find. Then we were told that some of it was destroyed and disappeared. Nobody knew what its use was and why it was there and so on. And finally we located something like an hour and a half, which was the only thing left. And I had that put on cassette and heard it. The quality of recording was very poor in some cases, and not all of it was useful for me. But imagine that now we do have, you can digitally transfer all this and get an absolutely first-class quality of voice. But if I had those 19 hours that brought him from his childhood to the time of independence, it would have been fabulous. Nehru talking about himself in his own voice.
I actually would have preferred his own voice to Joffrey's.
Joffrey's, yes, but then that's what I wanted to do. But I couldn't find it because I spoke to Mrs. Gandhi about it. Then then I heard that some of it was during the during the Janta government period. Some of it was deliberately destroyed. So I heard all this, So then I asked Mrs. Gandhi. She couldn't remember, but she did mention that there was about this man. That's how I came to know who it was, this member of parliament from Rajasthan. Then we went looking for him because he'd given up politics. But when I finally got in touch with his family, discovered that he was already dead. He had died about 5 years before that. He'd given up politics for a long time. So it'd gone out of news, you see. So nobody really knew where he was. And when we located his address and so on, we discovered he was dead.
Well, maybe it will still all turn up. You never know.
Yes, you can never tell. But this, I know that what All India Radio had, they gave to me, which I still have, some of these things.
Why don't we skip back to the other film I saw yesterday, Simhasva. You mentioned to me that you've always had problems with the censors.
Yeah, well, that's a film that's remained banned. I cannot understand why. Did you see you saw the whole film?
Yes.
What did you think of it?
Oh, I really enjoyed it. I suspect that the censors were worried about Orthodox Hindus seeing issues of privacy and.
Oh, this is not privacy at all. There are there's nothing. That you see, I'll tell you what it must have been, what it was. I know that first time when it was banned, what the reason for it was. It hurt the middle class Hindu sensibility.
I see.
This is a huge gathering of people that takes place once every 12 years. This is called Simhas. There is another Mela which is even bigger called Kumbh. Now, this is popular Hinduism. It is incredible. I was not being cynical when I made that film.
No.
I don't think it's a cynical film. I was not making fun of it. I was seeing the humor in it. But I was not turning up my nose and making fun of all this. It was not my intention to sensationalize any of that either. But I think what upset the censor board at that time was that they were offended because their Victorian morality was offended. You know, because the educated middle class has a tendency to be very prudish, and there is also what one might call a reformist streak, you know, that makes people very prudish, and they don't wish to see what they consider are not practices of a kind which they don't like themselves. And they wouldn't like to see this as being part of what they believe in and what their faith consists of, which I think is very short-sighted and somewhat silly.
Well, it's the old positive images issue that got other people into trouble, like Louis Mao.
Yeah. Yes, that's another thing. But then you see, I don't know. I've seen two, as I said, I saw two of the things. I used to know Louis Mao in those days, and so I saw two, one that he made on Calcutta and the other one called, the other one was on Bombay, about the communist movement. It had a Nambudi Pad's interview in it. Those I never, but then I couldn't see what was wrong in it, except that perhaps he was very critical of the government policies at that time. But I cannot see him having made fun of India.
It was also a very honest, frank look at poverty and all these other things that, as you put
perhaps yes, and it was a kind of look, I think, of well, it's also another thing. Like one of the things that we tend to get very, what's the word? We get very bugged by, is that we feel that people who see something immediately and who see something like an Indian situation and make very quick and glib opinions, you know, based on what they see the first time. A, it's unfamiliar, and B, it's different, and C, the difference always seems it's an equation in material terms. But for people who live in India, who have lived with all this for a long time, can see many other things, both for it and against it. So I think that's what you know, let's say the opinion forming community of India tends to object to, particularly a Western view, and because of this, you know. But you can't help it. I mean, what can you do about it? You don't expect everybody who comes to India to be particularly either involved or interested in everything that India stands for or represents, you know.
Well, I wondered if it was a similar issue with Sinhastan to
possibly
the naked sadhus.
Yeah, well, no, it wasn't the naked sadhus that got anybody worried. I think what they got worried about was that little dog curling around a shivling and squirrel eating up the prasad that is left, which I thought was such a delight, and I thought that this is one of the great things about India and our religious beliefs, that we have an attitude of all-inclusiveness. You know, one of the great things about religion on a popular level has always been its inclusiveness rather than its exclusiveness. And I would have thought that inclusiveness was something in favor of it. It's not a criticism. It is in fact something that you are happy to see, that it includes and not excludes, you know.
Well, they obviously didn't see it.
No, they didn't see it that way.
I also enjoyed the part about the folk theatre.
Yes.
That was very, very interesting.
Ramlila.
Yeah.
Yes, and how the moment this is another very interesting thing. You see, the moment an actor takes on the role of a deity, of a god, say Ram, then he is treated with reverence until he gets his clothes off.
That was amazing to see that.
And you see that, and I thought that's wonderful, because that is you see what they are holding in reverence is the persona that the actor is going to play, not the actor, not that silly fat boy, but who he is representing. And the moment the representational symbols are removed, he'll be like anybody else.
That's very interesting. And the other thing I liked was, as we already mentioned before, the use of voices, and to actually listen to some of these people instead of just watching them. I thought was quite, as you say, you've been doing it since the beginning.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So those are the 3 films I've seen of yours, documentaries rather. And Satyajit Ray just came before Nehru, didn't it?
Yes, it came before Nehru.
Another major project. The ones I have not seen, I understand, are a mix of educational documentaries and a lot of different subjects.
Yes, a lot of different subjects, industrial documentaries, all sorts of things.
So some of them are bread and butter projects?
Yes, because this is a filmmaking company. You know, so we make all kinds of films. Well, but I haven't had the time to make different kinds of films now. You know, over a period of time, you settle on the kind of films that you really want to make, and you don't necessarily have to do the others if you don't want to make them. That is, so that is the advantage of having made many kinds of films. And now, of course, people don't necessarily come to me and say, make an educational documentary for me.
No, I'm sure.
You know, they don't do that anymore.
However, you've almost acquired a role of, with Satyajit Ray and Nehru, of being a kind of official filmmaker for important state projects, almost.
No, that Satyajit Ray film wasn't like that. It was meant to be a short 20-minute film.
I see.
To be shown in cinemas. I said, I will not make any such thing. I said, if I have to make a film, I would like to make a film which is essentially an appreciation of his work. And if I have to do that, because I can't possibly trivialize the work of Satyajit Ray and put it into 20 minutes, that would be very silly. So they said, all right, we are increasing, making the project bigger and making it into a 40-minute film. So I said, okay, you can think that I'm making a 40-minute film. So I ended up by making a 2-hour, 12-minute film and took it to them. And I said, this is your 40-minute film. I mean, how could I do this? It was impossible for me to make a film other than what I have done. Because it wouldn't have been right. I mean, if I'm dealing with Satyajit Ray, then I'm dealing with the appreciation of his work. And his work cannot be capsulated in just 20 minutes, meaningfully in any way, or even 40 minutes.
So where is it being shown? In film society?
Yes, largely in film societies. It's been shown on television. It's been shown in 2 or 3 parts on television, which was not the best way to show it, but still they've shown it. And it's being shown largely through film societies. And of course in India we have many film societies, as you know. I mean, even under the Federation there are over 300 of them. So there are 300 outlets for that film in India.
It probably introduced Ray to a lot of people who'd never seen his work.
And only heard his name.
Including Films Division, probably.
Exactly. Who'd only heard his name. And this was quite important.
Have you got any more of these big blockbuster projects?
No, I don't really, except for what I'm doing, which you might say is a kind of documentary plus drama. I won't call it docudrama. It's not docudrama, but it's documentary plus drama, which is this Indian history project I'm doing, which is again based on Nehru's book, Discovery of India, which is going to be 52 hours.
For television also?
For television, well, I also hope that I will be able to use parts of it as proper drama, you know, I mean, fiction films.
So there are episodes that are dramatic and episodes that are more...
Yes,
like
most episodes have a combination of drama and documentary. Most of them. But some of them are pure drama. Say Ashoka. Pure drama.
For obvious reasons.
No, because we had enough material.
I suppose you could also have shown architecture the way you did in Nehru.
Yes.
As a substitute for...
No, but there is a reason, because if it's going to be on television, I would like to have a large audience for this. And I will not attract a large audience if I do not use the form of drama.
It's interesting that this hybrid of document and drama is also very popular in the West.
Yes.
Just recently.
Yes.
Do you think?
And for I'm sure for exactly the same reasons. Because if you had it as pure documentary, you would lose your audiences. They'd only be a specialist audience. But here I'm talking about the history of India. That should be the concern of every single living being in this country. And I don't see any reason why I should lose that audience simply because I'm making it as a documentary, you know. So if I include drama into it, or rather create a system where I take these people, I mean take my audience into that time, into that living period, not the dead period of the ruins, but into the living period, and to show them that things weren't all that different even, as they were not. In many ways, you know, and India is, I mean, Nehru keeps saying that constantly, that India is like a palimpsest, which is true, because at one time you see, I mean, you have everything cheek by jowl here. You have people who are living like in the 10th century, and you have people who are living like they're living anywhere else in the West, all at the same time. So, you know, we have what one might call a continuous and a not necessarily if you tell Indian history purely chronologically, you're not telling all of Indian history, because Indian history is also simultaneous. The past and the present are happening all the time, you know. It's not as if the past is separate from the present.
I certainly got the feeling in Nehru that you were using the past to talk about the present also. Just as a trivial example, the repeated anti-communalist interludes.
Yes.
Every 20 minutes there was sort of another little statement. And
because it's been one of those things, you know, because we are a very diverse people who are we are diverse and exclusive in different groups among ourselves, but we are a unity on the outside. And so as I always believe about ourselves, that we are inclusive on the outside and exclusive on the inside. You know, we are that kind of people. So from time to time we have to remind ourselves of this fact, that it's a very delicate balance, and that delicate balance requires a great deal to keep the balance right, you know. It takes a great deal of effort also. People must become aware of it. We are the only country that's like that. We have not excluded on the outside, but within ourselves we are very exclusive people. And because we exclude someone else, it doesn't necessarily mean that we must eliminate that someone else. You know? Because much of world history has done that. I mean, most countries of the world have done that. Because they have excluded someone, they have also felt the need to eliminate that someone. But we have not done so. And there's no reason why we should start now.
Well, 52 hours is enough time to make this argument, I would think. I'm looking forward to seeing it. Maybe we can just touch on one more thing, because we've already been going on quite long. I used the term documentary sensibility to describe many of your features. Would you agree with that?
Well, I wouldn't know whether it's a documentary sensibility. Perhaps it might be, but I would think that I do believe that a certain kind of factuality is essential. But factuality is not necessary, but it always helps. Because having facts around you does not necessarily help you arrive at any kind of truth. But it does help in giving you the right kind of structures to work with, which is the reason you might say that yes, I may have a documentary sensibility, but that's where it stops. I mean, it doesn't necessarily go beyond that point.
Well, yes. I mean, I was thinking along those lines also. The way you're always using true incidents as the backbone of the script.
Yes.
But I was also thinking in purely visual and dramatic terms. For example, the last one I saw, Susman. Is that your last feature?
Yes, last feature.
Just the way you're so interested in the loom and the weaving and the work. It's just fascinating. You actually show us how it's done.
Yeah.
And it's not necessary at all for the story to show us this technology in such detail. You must have yourself been absolutely fascinated.
Oh, I'm fascinated by it. In fact, fascinated to the extent that I got my main actor to learn how to weave, which he did for a month and a half before we started shooting.
This was clear.
Yes, and then once we went and shot this in this weaver's village. We were shooting in a weaver's village. Then he got so interested in weaving, Ompuri, that he stayed with the family in the village. He didn't stay with us in the hotel. And he lived in the village. So he said, it's easier for me because I wake up early here at 4 o'clock in the morning, and then they've given me a loom, so I work on it. And he got very fascinated, and he found it was doing a lot for him as a human being, to weave. So he used to weave when he was not shooting. If he was not on the set, he would be sitting and weaving. So he ended up by weaving a lot of very interesting cloth, and I wear 2 shirts made by him, woven by him, and the actress Shabana Azmi, he got her shawls and things which were woven by him. My wife has a whole set, a kurta and a pajama set made by him, woven by him. So does my daughter.
Does he have any more that he's still sewing?
And my cameraman, he got a couple of shirts also out of because he did a lot of weaving. By the time we finished our shooting, he had done something like 80 or 90 meters of different kinds of material, different designs too, of ikat, of that particular style of weave.
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, it is evident in the film that he's really doing it. Is this a principle in many of your films, this kind of location involvement in the actual...
Yes, I try and do that. It makes a lot of difference to the actors, also to the unit, I find. It makes a lot of difference. But in that sense, yes, documentary, what you were saying is probably true. Because I find that, you get people involved in a particular way which they would never be. It's not just seeing it from the outside. They are actually there. Manthan was shot like that. We were living in the same village where we shot the film for 2 months. So you got into the life rhythms of that village, and you were eating the food that they produced. So you were drinking the milk of their cows, you know. All this thing starts to happen. And so you get into a certain kind of rhythm. And that's the rhythm of the people there. And it's very important to be part of that rhythm. And you know, from the outside, yes, you can logically think about these things and arrive at them. But I find it's easier arrived at when you're doing something like that. And I find that everybody gets very involved. I mean, all your actors get part of the place, you know, they become, and they get to hear from the people in the village about their own lives. So these things have a way in the evolution of characters, how they evolve, you know. I mean, yes, there is a part written for them in the drama. There's a development of character of a particular kind. But this gets nicely tempered by interaction with the actual people. It makes a difference.
That's interesting. Do the villagers appear as extras?
Oh yes, there are no extras in that film. Outside of the actors, everybody else is from the village. Many of them even have one or two lines to speak. Yeah, so it's sort of you get involved with the place, and they get involved with you, because Ompuri, it's one of the very moving. I mean, something that got tears in all our eyes was when we were leaving, when we packed up from the village after we finished shooting everything we had to shoot there, which was about 40 days.
Susman,
yes. And when we were coming away, the entire village was there to wish us goodbye, but it wasn't, they really hadn't come for all of us. They'd come for Ankur, who represented them. And they all started to weep. You know, when he left, you know, it wasn't important, we could have gone and come, it wasn't so important, but when he left, it was just unbelievable. I've never seen, you know, 800 or 1,000 people from that village all be there and garland him and so on, and they all started to weep when he left. Amazing, you know.
Did they see the film?
Yes, they must have. Now they will probably, you see, the point is it's being released now.
Oh, I see.
Wasn't released for a long time. There were so many things, so many problems. Now 11th of March the film is being released in Bombay, Hyderabad and so on. So when it is released there, we will have a show in their village. Unfortunately, I always want to have it the moment the film is completed. But I've never managed it because, you see, I'm not the producer of the film. They don't take it as seriously as I want them to, you know. Because I've told them any number of times, I said, listen, we'll take a print, have a show for the village. Now they will.
Well, we've been going a while. Have you sensed that I've left anything out? Or?
I don't know. I don't know what you wanted.
Well, I think I've got lots that I wanted, so
Yeah.
so let's stop there.
Okay.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting. I hope I didn't take you away from your...
No, it's okay. But this is a nice little thing.